Timothy Geithner joins me right now. He would have to manage the chaos if the United States defaults for the first time in history. Secretary Geithner, thank you for being here. Well, you just heard what Jonathan said about what's on the table. Is it possible that there will be a framework deal in place by 4 p.m. this afternoon?
I hope so. Again, both leaders recognize they're running out of time. They need to get this process moving in the House by Monday night. To achieve that deadline, they need to have a framework that they know with complete confidence will pass both houses of Congress, that is acceptable to the President, and that should happen today.
And you think it can happen before the markets open in Asia?
Well, again, what they're trying to do, if you listen to what the Speaker has said, is trying to make sure they can demonstrate they have a framework that all parties can agree to, that can pass both houses of Congress, the President will sign within this time frame.
And
we're making progress, we are.
Well, you say that. Jonathan raised several incarnations of a potential deal, the two-part deal, the grand deal. What will it be? Well,
there are two types of frameworks now that are on the table. One is the framework that the President and the Speaker of the House have been going back and forth on for some time. That would be a comprehensive, balanced set of savings on the spending side to help secure Medicare, Medicaid for the future, and tax reform that would generate revenues.
So they are talking again?
Yeah, absolutely. They've been in touch throughout this period of time. But there's also a proposal that Senator McConnell made, Senator Reid made, that would agree on some upfront savings, but then establish a special committee with exceptional powers that could legislate quickly as a way to force Congress, or make it easier for Congress to make the tough choices we're going to have to make. Now, both those are on table. Now, they could be combined in various forms. But the most important thing is we can't adopt an approach that leaves the threat of default hanging over the country for another 6 months or so. That would be deeply irresponsible to do, and we do not think that's acceptable burden to put on the American economy.
Well, also, some investors are beginning to panic. I mean, people are saying, you know, who's in charge? Who's running this country? Has everybody gone out of their minds?
Well, you know, this is a critical test for the American political system. It's a critical test for Congress and for the Republican leaders in Congress, because the eyes of the world are on us, and they are looking to see whether the United States of America, as it always has done in the past, will not just meet our obligations, pay our bills, but start to make some progress in these long-term fiscal programs.
So what will you say now to reassure the world that this will be in place by this afternoon,
well,
a framework?
The leaders of Congress have said unequivocally, Republicans, not just Democrats, that we will meet our obligations, we are not going to default. What we're trying to do is not just achieve that, but also make sure we put in place a framework that allows Congress to make the tough decisions we need to make to get our fiscal house in order.
Now, Mr. Secretary, you and Speaker Boehner last week shook hands on a deal that involved $800 billion worth of revenue.
Let me stop you there.
All sides are saying that.
No, that's not true. We got close.
Did you make a deal with him?
No, we did not. And the President and the Speaker got very close, but there was a whole range of things yet to be resolved at that point when the Speaker pulled out on Friday.
Did you agree on that revenue number,
no, we
800 billion?
We did not. And again, at that point...
Are you saying that the Speaker is not telling the truth?
No, he didn't say it quite that way. What he said is at that point...
They have said that you agreed with him on $800 billion of revenue.
Christian, I can assure you that that's not the case. At that point, the Republicans were still asking for deeper cuts in Medicare and Medicaid than we thought was acceptable. Our position was, that, as you heard the President say, is we want to make sure that the deal is balanced so that we're not putting too much of the burden of getting our fiscal house in order on the backs of elderly Americans and the most vulnerable. And so at that point, we were very close, but we are not there yet.
Is $800 billion in revenue a number that you would accept?
Well, that's a judgment we're going to have to make in looking at the rest of the entire package. But again, I think the important thing, and I think the voices of reason across the political spectrum are getting stronger now, because you've seen Republicans recognize for the first time, and I give the Speaker a huge amount of credit for this, that a balanced framework that's acceptable to the American people is going to have to require tax reform that generates more revenues.
President Obama has ordered, and he did very conspicuously on Friday, Congress to go away and come back and show him how they're going to avoid a default. What's President Obama's plan?
Well, the President put on the table back in April, and has been discussing, as you know, in talks first that the Vice President led and then with the Speaker and with all the leadership, a comprehensive, balanced set of savings, force the government to use the resources of the taxpayer more wisely, more carefully, to put savings in place to help make sure we're securing Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security for future generations, but also tax reforms that will generate more revenue, make sure the burden is shared more fairly across the American people. That's the framework the President put out first in April. That's what we've been negotiating towards. And again, if you listen carefully, I know it's hard to read this place because it's a political town, political
moment. Is this
moment.
all politics? Is this going to get done?
There is a lot of politics there, but it has to get done. There is no choice. There's no alternative. Failure is not an option. And again, the leaders recognize that. I remember what's happening is that there are very loud voices in the Republican Party up there in Congress who have been saying for months that we should force the country to default for the first time in history.
But not the leadership.
No, not the leadership, but a very large member of Congress, large number of members of Congress in both houses have been saying we should default unless the President of the United States agrees to accept deep cuts in benefits for the elderly, for the most vulnerable, in order to make sure we can extend and sustain incredibly generous tax preferences for the top 2% of Americans. And that's not something that's acceptable to the American people, and it's not something we're going to accept.
The American people are getting increasingly frustrated. You've seen 80% of the people are very frustrated with the way all this is working.
And they should be frustrated.
What I want to know is, are you going to, and could you, even though the President has said his lawyers say it's not appropriate, use the 14th Amendment if there's no other choice?
It is not a workable option.
But President Clinton says it can be done.
We've looked at this very carefully, as had President Clinton and his lawyers when he was president. Mm-hmm. And this is not a workable option to limit the damage to the American people that would come from Congress not acting to avoid a default crisis.
The President has also, President Obama, talked to you, and you've talked to the Chairman of the Fed and others about how to contain a chaos if there is a default. How do you contain chaos if there's a default?
Well, again, the only way to limit the damage to the American people that would come from Congress failing to act is for Congress to act to raise the debt limit.
But if they don't?
Yeah, but that's the only option available. We do not have the ability.
But how's it going to get done? By magic?
No, they're going to pass the debt limit increase. That's what they're going to do. They're going to avoid a default crisis, as they've all said. You know, again, if you listen to them carefully, Speaker Boehner, Senator McConnell have said unequivocally that this country will not default. We will meet our obligations. The problem is they have a vocal, loud, frankly irresponsible minority in their parties who want to take this country to the edge of default, and that is not acceptable.
I interrupted you when you talked about the consequences of default. Is there a way to manage chaos if there is a default?
Default would be a tax on all Americans. It would cause irreparable damage to the credit standing of the American economy. It would be devastating to our credibility as a country, and it's not something you can undo, and that's why it's not an acceptable option. And the people who advocate it are deeply irresponsible.
Secretary Geithner, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Nice to see you.